My name is David Oliver Kling. I am one of 3 presiding bishops within the community of St. George, a micro-denomination or jurisdiction within the Young Rite. We are a part of a movement within Christianity known as the Independent Sacramental Movement. So what is the Independent Sacramental Movement, you ask? In this video, we will be taking a close look at this question through the lens of the elevator speech. Imagine you're on an elevator and someone asks you, what is an independent Catholic? Or what does ISM stand for and what does it mean? Or what is the Independent Sacramental Movement? You have less than a minute to respond to the question, what do you do? How do you answer this question? The Independent Sacramental Movement is a complex group of micro-denominations, and much time could be devoted to the many nuances found within the movement. But sometimes it is good to have a succinct description of who we are so the seed can be planted. The Independent Sacramental Movement is small, but we have a lot to offer. So being able to successfully engage in soft-evangelism through pleasant conversation will certainly help spread the word about the best-kept secret within Christianity. So, what is the Independent Sacramental Movement? The Independent Sacramental Movement is an incredibly diverse, autonomous movement with hundreds of micro-denominations rooted in apostolic succession and celebrating the 7 sacraments instituted by Jesus Christ. That's a succinct elevator speech, but don't take my word for it. I have compiled several others, such as Archbishop Alan Kemp, the founder and first presiding bishop of the Ascension Alliance.
When I tell people that I'm an independent Catholic priest or I'm a bishop or whatever, depending upon who it is that's asking me the question, usually that I will say that the independent movement is a group of people who have valid ministries that they identify as Catholic or as Orthodox, but yet they are not part of the mainstream Roman Catholic Church, and they're not part of the Federation of Orthodox Bishops. I think it's called SCOBA. And I would say that the independent movement tends to be really a wide diversity of people with different orientations. There are people that are perhaps on the liberal side who are very free in terms of where their focus is in terms of religious, being open to all kinds of things. And then there are people on the other end who are extremely conservative and who may be even more conservative in their ideology than, for example, the Roman Catholic Church or some of the Orthodox jurisdictions. And so within the independent movement, you have valid ministry by virtue of apostolic succession, the same claim to sacerdotal authority as the Roman Catholic Church or mainstream Orthodox churches, but have the freedom to explore beyond, some of the doctrines that have been adopted by the Roman or the Orthodox churches. And so I like to talk about how the movement is very diverse. Personally, I'm sort of on the progressive or the open liberal side as opposed to the conservative side, but I certainly recognize that there's a lot of diversity within the independent movement.
Bishop Brian Stanford with the Gnostic Catholic Union.
For me, it's something that I've been actively working on, and I actually find myself having to give an elevator speech pretty frequently because I have a public-facing job. What I try to say is usually too much. I start going into, back in the 1700s, there were these people who split off of the Catholic Church, and recently my fiance described me to someone as he's a renegade Catholic priest, and what he's doing as Catholicism probably doesn't sound like anything you have ever heard of as Catholicism. So as an experiment, that's the elevator speech I'm working with right now, which usually makes people kind of laugh and then gives an opening that they can ask more questions about that, and then I can go into more of the detail that I love.
Bishop Carol Vaccariello, an independent Catholic bishop and United Church of Christ pastor.
I think the best way to describe it is that being a sacramental movement means that we observe the sacraments, which most people relate to as the Roman Catholic Church. So I would say we've kept the best of the Roman Church in terms of the sacraments, but we've let go of the hierarchical structure that is oppressive. And so it's an observation of the sacraments in a religious system to assist our living. And the ones people most often think of are baptism, marriage, communion, all of those kinds of sacraments.
Bishop Chris Carpenter, presiding bishop of the Reformed Catholic Church.
That's a very good question. And it's interesting to me because, I kind of came to, as we'll discuss in a bit, I kind of came to the Independent Sacramental Movement kind of out of desperation because I had been a Roman Catholic priest and I was kind of backed into a corner by my then bishop. And I'd been very critical of the Independent Sacramental Movement that I was aware of at the time in my area. And yet, when I kind of had to seek it out and affiliated with it, I realized the diversity of it is tremendous, more than I ever realized. And the history of it is longer and more significant than I ever realized. And so, I just encourage people to explore, first of all, realize there are other options for Catholicism. It's not all about Rome. Rome and the Roman Catholic Church is not the only Catholic Church and hasn't been the only Catholic Church for centuries. So, I really encourage people to just broaden their minds and be adventurous and take a leap. Check out what communities are near you or around you that might ultimately feed you better than the traditional Catholic churches or the Roman Catholic Church that you're probably more familiar with.
Father David Jones with the Celtic Catholic Church, USA.
So what is my elevator speech? I would say, and I don't want to be a contrarian here, but I think it's very difficult to talk about one's encounter with the divine, encountering our Lord and Christ, Jesus Christ, in a 30-second, a 1 minute, or 2 minute elevator speech. So when I normally meet someone for the first time or beginning a conversation, either as a spiritual father or just hoping to introduce someone to the world of independent Catholicism, there are two fundamental questions that I ask them. The first is, how's your heart? So what does that mean? And I take a clue from the Hebrews, where the heart is your very essence, your personhood, your I. And so how is your heart? Tell me about your life. Tell me what's important to you, what makes you tick. The second question I always ask is, are you happy? Because I think it's important when we meet someone is to figure out what is the origin of the fire in their belly. And once again, what makes them tick? What do they believe is true, beautiful, and good? My own spiritual father, Luigi Giussani, who's now been formally declared a servant of God on the Roman side, would describe this concept called the religious sense. And what is the religious sense? The religious sense is a desire, a yearning, a begging of every person to know truth, to find beauty, and to know the good. So truth, beauty, and the good. And so when I began a conversation, be it a short or a long conversation with anyone, I always ask them, what is true for you? Where do you find beauty? And what is the good for you? And if you can connect and find some common ground, then the future will be bright in that relationship. Now, specifically regarding questions of the Independent Sacramental Movement, I think there's no cookie cutter answer to someone that's asking you about why are you independent Catholic, or, what is your church all about? I think you have to know the audience of who you're talking to. So if you're talking to someone who's coming at you in a very combative manner, who's maybe very polemical or sectarian, maybe a Roman Catholic who believes himself to be apologists for, the truths of Rome, that conversation would go in a different direction when they would ask you, why are you independent, or make claims that you're a heretic. That's a different conversation than someone who's maybe never encountered Christ. And so when they would, so let's go to the latter example. Maybe someone who has never encountered the Lord or encountered Christ, when they would ask me, what is the Independent Sacramental Movement? Well, first of all, they're never even going to even know those terms, that language. And that's why I try to begin a conversation on what makes you tick, what makes you human, where can we find common ground? And then I can, and let's talk about how the divine has made himself or herself known to you today. today? How has God encountered, how have you encountered God today? So for someone that isn't coming from a Christian perspective or a nominal Christian perspective, that's how I'll begin that conversation. For someone who's just a well-formed Christian, who's maybe an evangelical, because I'm here in the Bible Belt in the Midwest, then we can talk about the Lord. I think for someone coming from an evangelical, a well-formed evangelical or Protestant background, the conversation has to be Christocentric, right? We need to talk about the Lord and things that they're familiar with and some of the fundamental beliefs that we share in common. And so I think that's a good way to begin the conversation. Now, if I'm in a conversation with a well-formed Catholic and they're not being combative, then we can have an important conversation about the history of Catholicism. We can talk about really Catholicism at its very origin, and in the first millennium was an independent series of churches based in regions. It was autonomous, and we can talk in a more specified, specific way that I think is helpful for them to see. Just the Roman perspective necessarily isn't always, it doesn't show the whole story.
Bishop Gregory Godsey, presiding bishop of the Old Catholic Churches International.
The Independent Sacramental Movement is kind of the anti-mainstream church, as it were. We are a decentralized version of Christianity that spans from ultra-conservative to ultra-liberal, from, very progressive to very much 15th century Tridentine. There's so much variety within the independent movement that if you can't find something that fits you, you're just not looking hard enough. And that most of the people in the movement are looking toward helping and ministering to people in the world. That they're not as concerned about building huge edifices. They're not concerned about bringing in millions of dollars. They're concerned about helping people become more spiritual. They kind of heal some of the division and some of the pain caused by the mainstream jurisdictions, mainstream denominations in the world.
Father Jerry Maynard with the Order of Mary Magdalene.
So I would tell people that the ISM is a conglomeration of individuals and communities around the United States, but also around the world, who identify with the three most prominent Christian traditions of Anglican, Catholic, and Orthodox, but who for some reason, whether theological, political, or practical, divert from the main hierarchies of those traditions.
Bishop Joseph Mena, the Prior General and Bishop of the Augustinians of the Immaculate Heart of Mary.
I've actually met a lot of people who don't have any idea that we exist. I live here in the Northeast in the Philadelphia area, where the Roman Catholic Church, of course, is still very strong, and people do not generally understand that there are other ways to be Catholic. So when we're out at events, we try and schedule ourselves to be at different local fairs and things of that nature with a table or such, and people come up and, they do sort of look, what is this about? We've used catchphrases before to kind of catch people's attention, things like, Vatican-free Catholics, things of that nature, to try and spark conversations. And I usually just begin by explaining very briefly the history of the Old Catholic Church and their break from Rome over the election of their bishop. Talk a little bit about Daugherty and his church in South America to try and get people to understand that these breaks with Roman Catholicism were more about policy and polity and not theology, that it's the same sort of sacramental worship, the same beliefs, the same pieties and devotions, but we have a different polity of how we govern ourselves and see ourselves. And free from the jurisdiction of Rome, we're able to make certain cultural decisions about issues that affect us as a church, that allow us to be different.
Cleric Kathleen Ostlie with the Apostolic Johannite Church.
I would say probably that the Independent Sacramental Movement emphasizes tradition and the sacraments, but doesn't fall in line necessarily with churches people are more familiar with, like the Catholic Church or Orthodox Church, though it presents itself in a similar way. It tends to carry deeper doctrines more openly. In a lot of Independent Sacramental Movement, there's an esoteric undertone to a lot of it, some more than others, right? But I would say that more openly, they tend it isn't so much priests behind closed doors doing things all the time. They tend to involve the congregation, at least at the AJC, in kind of what's going on and explaining the deeper meanings to the congregation rather than it being only for the clergy.
Bishop Kenny von Fulmer, presiding bishop of the Convergent Christian Communion, formerly known as the Anthem Network.
The Independent Sacramental Movement is a collection of very diverse expressions of the church. And that can be anything from Catholic to Orthodox to Anglican, and quite frankly, even the Anthem Network, which is a little bit of all of those. But generally speaking, whenever I tell folks that, hey, it's Roman Catholics that have maybe left the church and have found a home in a place where they could express themselves as who they are, or even Orthodox who have not found a home in the traditional canonical churches, have found a home in the Independent Sacramental Movement.
Father Kevin Daugherty with the Convergent Christian Communion.
The Independent Sacramental Movement is an incredibly complex network. I would say that the Independent Sacramental Movement is a large association of Catholic and Apostolic Christians who believe in historical Christianity as expressed in the traditional sacraments and traditional apostolic succession, but they believe in that form of Christianity without being under the direct authority of the Vatican or any other traditional metropolitan see. And of course you have independent Catholics, independent Anglicans, independent Orthodox, and even though there's all this diversity, the ISM is in many ways a common cohesive thing. There's a lot of ecumenism within these different parts of the movement. The different bishops usually recognize one another. There's usually a common sacrament and even common lines of succession. And so while the Independent Sacramental Movement is extremely diverse, it's also extremely cohesive and historical, and really it brings together the fullness of Christianity. Because on the one hand, you have historical Christianity as commonly expressed within Catholic, Orthodox, or Anglican churches. But on the other hand, you also have freedom. You have the diversity and the organic movement that you saw in the Apostolic Church as well. And that's how, for me, that's how I would say the ISM is.
Bishop Lainie Peterson, presiding bishop of the Open Rite.
What I tell them is that it is a movement, not an organization and not a denomination, but a movement within the broader Christian church in which individuals who have apostolic succession offer the sacraments within an independent, either hyper-individual or congregational context. So what you have in this movement are people who have been ordained to the holy orders, deacon, priest, bishop, who are offering the Eucharist and the other sacraments, often within small local communities or in some cases in broader ministries such as chaplaincy or charity.
Deacon Michael Holford with the Ecumenical Catholic Church of Australia.
I'd probably begin with the phrase independent Catholic. I know it's not a perfect phrase, but most people are aware of what Catholic means to some degree. Then I will go to emphasise that we are a church apart from the Roman Catholic Church, ministered or managed by bishops, priests and deacons, bishops in apostolic succession. If the person I'm talking to has a little bit of church history behind them, I might point out the old Catholic Church. Otherwise, I might use the Anglican Church as a bit of an analogy of bishops validly consecrated in apostolic succession, but not part of the Roman Catholic Church. So I would also emphasise the importance of the sacraments as, I suppose, the central and most important feature that defines us as a movement alongside that apostolic succession.
Bishop Nina Paul, presiding bishop of the Open Catholic Church.
Well, it's not always an easy conversation depending on my audience. If I'm with people who are very devout Catholics, very strong Romans, I just try to explain to them that we've been around for a long time. I'm a bishop in a church that is not connected to Rome, except by lineage, by sacrament, and I'm not under the canon law. And that's my standard answer when they say, but you can't because of canon law 1024. I'm not subject to their canon law.
So do you get a lot of pushback for being a woman?
Not in my work, because I don't bring up my own religious tradition in my work. I do, with some Christians and some Catholics, get pushback for being a woman. I did have an experience last year of working for a hospice who actually had a Roman Catholic priest on staff as one of the chaplains, and he gave me a very bad time.
Father Robert Mitchell with Ecclesia Epignostica Seminary.
As far as I'm concerned, what's important about the sacramental movement, to know about the independent sacramental movement, is that the doors are open to your experience of Christ. Oftentimes what we have is we have a tendency to believe that you have to conform before you enter through the doors. And I think what's great about the independent sacramental movement is that the doors are open before you believe. And so it's okay just to come in and look around and experience the sacraments.
Subdeacon Tim Oliveri with the Community of St. George, the Young Rite.
I think I would describe ISM as a movement within Christianity that's centered on the sacraments as they are typically practiced within the Catholic and Orthodox traditions. But unlike those traditions, there's a greater emphasis on smaller communities that are independent of a larger denomination. And it's an imperfect description, but I feel like it kind of captures the spirit of kind of how I approach ISM. As I was thinking about it, and we were having a Facebook discussion about this a few days ago, there are times when I kind of question the I in the ISM and how we view the whole role of being independent. But at the same time, it is part of who we are and what we do. So I like to try and take a little bit more of a holistic view of the movement.
So there you have it, several different elevator speeches. So what's your elevator speech?